Juniper by Monica Furlong. Chapter 15. Back in Angharad's house the next morning, Truan and I made an odd discovery. "Watch this," she said to me. "I've just discovered it." There was a moment's pause, and then her smock, which had been lying over a chair, got up. That is the only word for it, moved across the room, and flopped down on the floor. There was another pause, during which I could feel her concentrating hard, and then her smock rose up again and returned to the place it had come from. I was impressed, and at once determined to outdo her. A candle stood on the table, the one that had lighted us to bed the night before. I closed my eyes and concentrated, thinking only of the candle. When I opened them again, the candle was alight. Truan then extinguished the candle without moving from her bed. I lit it again, and she put it out. "I know," said Truan. "Let's see if we can make something, both of us together." We agreed on a spider, and almost at once a spider ran across the floor. In the days that followed, both of us had a passion for trying out our new skills. We hid this from Angharad and Uni, sensing that they would think us very frivolous. But we simply could not stop. As soon as we were alone together or out for a walk, we would start on our trumpery magic. It was the greatest fun, and we found it difficult to believe that we would ever tire of it. I am sure that Angharad, at least, hearing the shouts of laughter that came from our room, knew very well what we were up to, but she never said a word. Perhaps she reflected that our time together was coming to an end. We had changed in another way, too, since the day of the ceremony. "Do you notice something different about your sense of smell?" I asked Truan tentatively one day. She nodded. "I can smell you and Angharad and Uni, not just the usual human smells, but something else. It's as if they tell me something, just as the expression on a person's face tells you something about them. I can smell Angharad's goodness and Uni's strength. I can smell your healing wisdom. And I can smell your beauty." We asked Angharad about it, and she confirmed, as if surprised that we would even ask, that smell was one of the skills of a Doran. It was early summer when Uni and I set off for home, and our journey this time was pleasant. The hedgerows were fragrant with roses and honeysuckle, the meadowsweet billowed beneath them. The sky was a wide, cloudless blue, and we heard the cuckoo sing its late song. As we crossed the meadows, skylarks high above us rinsed our ears with their joyful din. We walked along the edges of cornfields full of young grain, past gardens from which we helped ourselves to tender pea pods, through misty blue woods, through dim forests, and over gentle hills. Sometimes, far away, we could see the glimmer of the sea. This time we slept warmly at night, full of Angharad's oatcake and fermented whey. One evening, as we ate our supper, Uni surprised me. "Angharad said I did not feed you properly. Because I eat little, I forget that young things need their food. I'll try to do better." Uni said this without embarrassment or shame, but just as a fact. Angharad had pointed it out to her, and now she understood. I was touched. "It's all right," I said awkwardly. I had felt very sad at leaving Truan and Angharad, not to mention the comfort of Angharad's house. But I found that I took pleasure in being alone again with Uni, that although no word of affection was expressed and there were no embraces, her austere warmth toward me gladdened and pleased me. Since the time in the stone hut, she seemed a little more friendly, as if she was sure of me in some way. The long days in the open air and nights of sound sleep made me feel extraordinarily well. As we came out of the forest near Uni's hut, and I saw the great shadow of the tor above us, I felt a little shiver of excitement and joy. It was not dark, but already a brilliant sliver of moon hung in the sky over the tor. Rain had made a pool on the grass in front of the hill, and sitting upon it were 12 swans, their beautiful heads and wings mirrored in the water. The sun shone upon the tor at an angle that lit it strangely. Its bare, terraced sides were shadowed, its outline haloed. Uni and I stood quite still, and Uni made some exclamation under her breath. It might have been an incantation or a prayer. After a few moments, she walked on, and I followed. The hut, with its dead embers, some moldering pig hanging on a hook from the ceiling, threadbare rug, and pathetic bits of furniture seemed unwelcoming, dusty, and cold, and for a moment my heart sank. Burying the rotting carcass outside under Uni's orders, however, I saw the moon through the branches of the hazel tree and the outline of the hill springing behind it, and I knew that this was the place where I should be. Uni had seated herself with unusual weariness in her old rocking chair. I lit a fire, swept and dusted, and made soup with the remains of the vegetables that Angharad had given us. Going outside to gather herbs, I saw the empty pigsty and remembered the incident before we had left home. After supper, I counted on my fingers. 3 months before I go back to my parents, I said. Uni nodded. There is a lot to do, she said. As always with Uni, I could not bring myself to ask what there was to do, and she never explained. Within a few days, Uni and I had fallen straight back into our old routines. There were the household chores, the long silences, the meager meals. But Angharad's words had driven her to try harder to feed me. On the day after we returned home, she disappeared without a word and came back several hours later, laden with a large sack of wheaten flour. I immediately started making bread and cakes with it, as Angharad had taught me. On other days, she returned with eggs and honey and cabbages, and a set of newly hatched chicks, which she gave to me to rear. I was enchanted by their furry little bodies and loved to pick them up in my hands. When some of them died, as chicks do, I grieved over them, to Uni's irritation. It seemed to me now that I needed someone, something, to love. I missed Angharad and Truin badly. Though Uni noticed every flower and berry and cloud and turn of the wind, it felt as if she could live with me only by forgetting and ignoring me for much of the time. Angharad had given me some material to make a pallet for myself, and after I stuffed the bag with straw, I was able to sleep much more comfortably and warmly at night. She had also made me a blanket in a brilliant pattern of dusky orange and midnight blue. I was never cold beneath it, and it hung over the back of the rocking chair by day, giving the room a vivid focus. I picked flowers, too, taking one of our few bowls to set them in. I was out in the meadow near the hut one day picking some wild lilies when I heard the sound of hoofs on the trail, and there was my beloved Gamal. I was so thrilled to see him that it took me a few moments to notice that there was another rider behind him. To my dismay, it was Finbar. Gamal gave a whoop of pleasure at seeing me, shouted to Finbar, and came across the field. Then Gamal and I began to talk. He wanted to know where I had been. He had come several times in search of me. I wanted to hear about everyone at Castle Door. He had brought me a present from Marut, some wind-dried meat that was a special delicacy among our people. Finbar listened patiently, smiling. Since their last visit, I had considered Finbar a sort of enemy, but he seemed perfectly friendly toward me. It was disconcerting. "We thought we could stay here overnight and then spend tomorrow together," said Gamal. My heart sank slightly. How would I persuade Uni to let me have the day to myself? "I'll go and ask Uni," I said nervously. Uni was sitting and rocking herself placidly in the hut, in the way that was typical of her. And in the way that was typical of her, she knew what I had come to ask before I asked it. "They needn't think I'm going to feed them," she said. "Couldn't we?" I pleaded. "We've plenty of meal." Uni did not answer. "I could make some porridge or something." "And you can't have the time off to play with them. We have a lot of work to do." I felt furious both at her lack of hospitality and her unfairness. I went out, slamming the hut door behind me. Gamal noticed my crestfallen expression at once. "It's all right," he said. "We can sleep out in the meadow in our blankets." "She won't give you any food," I said. I had grown up in a tradition that treated the guest as sacred, and I felt humiliated. "We've got enough in our saddlebags." "But I will come out with you tomorrow. I'll pretend to be going to the well to get water, and then I'll run off with you." Finbar, I could see, admired me for this, but Gamal looked a bit worried. "Won't you get into awful trouble?" he asked. I shrugged. The thought of a day's fun was worth it. The next morning I set off with my buckets, left them lying by the well, and ran off with Gamal and Finbar. We rode to a distant beach, splashed in the sea for hours, climbed rocks and sunned ourselves. Gamal played to us on his flute. Then I rode Gamal's pony along the sand. It was wonderful to feel the motion of a horse beneath me. "You do ride well," Finbar said admiringly, and my heart slightly softened toward him, though I gave no indication of this. Also, when he caught a fish, he came and presented it to me as if giving me a present. But I scarcely acknowledged it. I could not forget the shame of the occasion when I had killed the pig, and the mockery in Finbar's eyes at a moment when I was so unhappy. In any case, I wanted Gamal to myself. As if sensing my wish to be alone with Gamal, Finbar went off for a long ride by himself. "How's Marut?" I asked Gamal. A shadow crossed his face and he shrugged without replying. What he wanted to talk about was music. A new musician had come to court since I had left and was secretly teaching Gamal. "It's not so much playing that interests me now. I have started to make up music. One night at dinner, Evert sang a song I had composed, and Marut said how beautiful it was, without knowing it was mine, of course." "She would never let you be a musician, would she?" "No one can stop me from thinking of music, not even Marut," said Gamal. As the afternoon wore on, I grew a bit fearful of going back to confront Uni. "Do you want us to come with you?" Gamal asked. "No, go on home," I said. Gamal promised to come again, but I felt very sad as they cantered off along the beach. I noticed as I passed the well that the buckets were still lying there, so I filled them and took them back with me. Uni was sitting in the rocking chair as if she had spent the whole day there. I braced myself for a scolding, but none came. In fact, I had an odd sort of feeling that she was rather pleased with me. I could not understand it at all. In fact, it was quite disturbing.